You are not capable of handling modern children anymore. Mom, we need someone who understands today's parenting methods. Those words sliced through me like a blade as I stood in Sarah's pristine kitchen, folding tiny sweaters that still smelled of fabric softener and love. I had just finished preparing lunch for my grandson's homemade chicken nuggets, cut into dinosaur shapes, the way 6-year-old Marcus liked them, and apple slices arranged in a rainbow for 4-year-old Tyler. But apparently, even that simple act of care was now considered outdated. Insufficient. Sarah didn't even pause her frantic typing on her laptop as she delivered this verdict. Her manicured fingers never stopped moving across the keys, as if my dismissal was just another item on her endless to-do list. It is not personal, Mom, she added, her voice carrying that practiced tone she used with difficult clients. James and I have simply decided to go in a different direction with childcare. I stood there, holding Marcus's favorite dinosaur shirt, the one I would bought him last Christmas, the one he insisted on wearing every Tuesday because it was Grandma Day. My throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped invisible hands around my windpipe. At 71, I thought I would earn the right to dignity, especially from my own daughter. Of course, I heard myself say, though the words felt foreign in my mouth, I understand completely, because that is what mothers do. We smile and nod even when our hearts are breaking, even when the ground beneath us is crumbling away. Before we dive into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. For her light we share stories of women who find strength in the darkness. That night, I lay in the twin bed in what used to be Sarah's childhood bedroom, now converted into my guest space in their sprawling suburban home. The room still had her old dance trophies on the shelves, remnants of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, begging me to sing her to sleep. The house was silent, except for the soft whir of the baby monitor I would forgotten to turn off after tucking Tyler in. His gentle breathing filled the room through the crackling speaker, a reminder of what I was apparently no longer qualified to protect. You are not capable of handling modern children. The words echoed in my head like a cruel song. Modern children. As if love and patience had expiration dates, as if the hands that had raised Sarah herself, that had guided her through scraped knees and broken hearts, were somehow defective now. I thought about my late husband Robert, gone these past 4 years. How he used to joke that I could calm any crying baby with my magic grandmother touch. He would have been appalled at Sarah's coldness, the way she would dismiss decades of maternal wisdom with the casual cruelty of someone discarding an old appliance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I would moved in with Sarah and James after Robert's death, selling the home we would shared for 38 years because Sarah insisted she needed my help with the boys. I don't know how to balance everything, Mom. She would cry during one of our late-night phone calls. Please come live with us. The boys need their grandmother close by. And I would come running. Like I always did. I would packed up my life, donated most of my furniture, and squeezed myself into this small room under the eaves, grateful to be needed again after the hollow months of widowhood. For 2 years, I would been their unpaid nanny, cook, and housekeeper. I woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, packed school lunches with hand-written notes, and stayed up late folding laundry while Sarah attended her book club or date nights with James. I would convince myself it was a fair exchange, my time and energy for purpose and proximity to my grandsons. But now, staring at the ceiling in this room that never quite felt like home, I realized I would been deluding myself. I wasn't family here. I was help, and apparently inadequate help at that. The morning after Sarah's announcement, I found her in the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, scrolling through her phone with the same detached focus she would shown the day before. She looked up when I entered, offering a bright, artificial smile that never reached her eyes. Good morning, Mom. I have been thinking about what we discussed yesterday. I found some lovely senior living communities nearby. There is one called Sunset Manor that has wonderful activities, chair, yoga, bingo nights, even painting classes. My stomach clenched. Senior living. She was actually suggesting I move to a nursing home because I was no longer useful enough for her lifestyle. The casualness with which she delivered this suggestion, as if we were discussing weekend plans rather than the dismantling of my life, left me speechless. I see, I managed, pouring myself coffee with hands that trembled slightly. And when would you like me to make this transition? Well, there is no rush, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise, maybe by the end of next month. That would give us time to find the right fit and get you settled before the holidays. Before the holidays, she wanted me gone before Christmas, before those precious moments with Marcus and Tyler that had become the highlights of my year, before the traditions we would build together, decorating cookies, reading "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" in my old rocking chair, watching their faces light up as they opened presents. I would carefully wrapped with shaking but determined hands. The boys will be so confused, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Sarah's smile flickered. Children are resilient, Mom. They will adjust, and you will still see them for visits. Of course, visits, like I would become a distant relative rather than the woman who would sing them to sleep countless nights, who knew Marcus was afraid of thunderstorms and Tyler liked his sandwiches cut diagonally, who remembered that Tyler needed his stuffed elephant to sleep and Marcus always wanted extra syrup on his pancakes. I should have seen the signs earlier. The gradual erosion of my place in their lives hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow, systematic replacement that I would been too grateful and too blind to recognize. Before Sarah decided I was too old to matter, our life together had seemed comfortable, even loving. After Robert died suddenly of a stroke, while tending his tomato garden, I would felt utterly lost. The house we would shared for nearly 4 decades felt enormous and empty, filled with his absence. Every corner held memories: the breakfast nook, where we would shared coffee for 38 years. The living room where we would watched countless movies together, the bedroom where I still slept on his side because mine felt too cold. Sarah had swept in during those dark months like a concerned daughter should. She would help me sort through Robert's belongings, held my hand during the memorial service, and gently suggested that living alone wasn't healthy for someone my age. "You don't have to go through this alone, Mom," she would said, her arm around my shoulders as we stood in my quiet kitchen. "James and I have plenty of space, and the boys would love having their grandma around all the time. You would be doing us a huge favor." Actually, a favor. I would felt so grateful to be needed again, to have purpose beyond my grief. Within 3 months, I would sold my house, the one Robert and I had painted room by room, where we would celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where our love had grown deeper with each passing year. Sarah had been enthusiastic about the arrangement initially. She would shown me the small room upstairs, promising to redecorate it to my taste. She would talked about how wonderful it would be to have built, in childcare, someone who truly loved the boys and could give them the attention they deserved. And for a while, it had worked beautifully. My days found rhythm again. I would wake early to prepare breakfast. Marcus loved pancakes shaped like his initials. Tyler preferred scrambled eggs with cheese cut into tiny cubes. I would pack their school bags, making sure Tyler had his anxiety bear and Marcus had his lucky pencil for spelling tests. The boys adored our routines. After school, we would sit at the kitchen table doing homework together. I would help Marcus sound out challenging words, while Tyler colored beside us, occasionally looking up to share whatever story was unfolding in his imagination. Those quiet afternoons filled a hole in my heart I hadn't realized was there. Sarah seemed grateful then. She would come home from her real estate office to find dinner prepared. The boys bathed and in pajamas, their backpacks ready for the next day. "I don't know how you do it, Mom," she would say, sinking into her chair with visible relief. "You make everything look so effortless." I would flush with pride at these moments, feeling valued and necessary. Robert had always called me a natural mother, but I would worried that skill might have faded during the years when it was just the two of us. Caring for Marcus and Tyler proved I still had something valuable to offer. We established traditions that felt sacred to me. Saturday morning pancakes with real maple syrup. Sunday afternoon walks to the park where I would push Tyler on the swings, while Marcus climbed the jungle gym. Bedtime stories where I would act out all the voices, making the boys giggle until Sarah called for quiet from downstairs. Even James seemed to appreciate my presence. He would thank me for keeping the household running smoothly, compliment my cooking, ask about my day with genuine interest. I felt like part of a family again, rather than a lonely widow counting down empty days. The photo albums from that first year tell the story of our happiness. Birthday parties where I am front and center, helping blow out candles. Christmas morning with me in my robe, watching the boys open presents I would carefully wrapped. Easter egg hunts in the backyard where my laughter mingles with theirs. I thought we would found our perfect arrangement. Sarah got the support she needed. The boys got consistent love and attention, and I got purpose and belonging. It felt like the natural order of things, 3 generations under one roof, each contributing what they could. Looking back, I can see the subtle signs that things were shifting. Sarah's grateful smiles became more infrequent. Her compliments about my help turned into casual corrections about my methods. She stopped asking my opinion about family decisions and started making announcements about changes she and James had decided upon. But I was so comfortable in my role, so grateful to feel needed, that I convinced myself these changes meant nothing significant. I told myself Sarah was just stressed from work, that the boys were going through normal developmental phases that required patience. The first real crack didn't come with yelling or slamming doors. It came in the quiet way that someone who once saw you with admiration now looks at you with impatience. It was a Wednesday afternoon, late autumn. Tyler had a runny nose, so I kept him home from preschool. He loved being curled up in my lap, wrapped in a fleece blanket, while I read his favorite story, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. We would read it so many times. I barely needed the book anymore. As I ran my finger across the page, he leaned his little head against my shoulder and whispered, "You read better than anyone, Grandma." That moment filled my heart. It reminded me why I stayed, why I helped, why I kept showing up even when I was exhausted. But then Sarah walked in, heels clacking sharply on the hardwood. She glanced at the 2 of us on the couch, took one look at Tyler's glassy eyes and sniffly nose, and frowned. "Mom," she said sharply, "why is he napping this late? His whole sleep schedule is going to be messed up again." "He is not napping," I explained gently. "We are just reading. He is under the weather, so I thought a calm afternoon. That is not the point." Sarah cut me off. "You keep forgetting how we are trying to regulate his nap routine. You cannot just do what you used to do with me. It is different now." She sighed, like she had to explain the laws of gravity to me. Then, without even glancing at Tyler, she turned and walked into the kitchen. I sat there, stunned. Not because she corrected me, I could handle that, but because of the way she said it, flat, cold, uninterested, as though I were a well-meaning but increasingly problematic houseguest. I gently tucked Tyler in and went to my room. That evening, I overheard her talking to James. They were in the kitchen. I was folding laundry in the hallway. She didn't know I could hear. "She means well," Sarah said, "but honestly, she is kind of slipping. She forgets things. She let Tyler nap at 4 p.m. today. Again, I think she is getting too old to really help like she used to." James gave a low hum, not disagreeing. "I just don't want to hurt her feelings," she continued. "But at some point, we might need someone more capable." Capable, that word stayed with me all night. Not loving, not helpful, not present. Just capable. Like I was a machine slowly breaking down. I didn't say anything. Not the next day, not the day after that, but something in me shifted. A seed planted, small, quiet, but stubborn. A question that hadn't entered my mind before. Am I a burden to her? From that moment on, I began noticing little things I hadn't before. Danica stopped saying, "Thank you" when I cooked dinner or picked up groceries. She stopped asking for my opinion and started giving orders. And every now and then, she would make a comment. Subtle, casual, that stung more than she realized. like the time she rolled her eyes when I didn't understand how to use the baby monitor app, or when she snapped, "Mom, please stop telling the kids stories about how you did things." It is confusing. I chalked it up to stress. She was working full-time raising 2 kids. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But then again, I would raise a child too. On my own, with less money and fewer conveniences. And I never spoke to my mother that way. The criticism became more frequent after that. Sarah would correct my discipline methods, question my meal choices, and override my decisions about the boys' activities. Each correction felt like a small rejection, a vote of no confidence in my abilities. Then came the nanny. She was young, cheerful, and, to be fair, good with the kids. But I wasn't warned. I simply walked into the living room one morning, and there she was, playing with Tyler on the rug. Sarah came downstairs and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. This is Jennifer. She is just here to help a bit." "Help with what?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Just pick up and drop off, maybe a few afternoons. We thought it might give you a break." A break? I hadn't asked for one. I didn't want a break. I wanted to be included. Still, I swallowed my pride and offered to train Jennifer on Tyler's bedtime routine. Sarah cut me off. "She is a professional, Mom. Let her figure it out." That one stung more than I let on. Suddenly, my days became strangely quiet. No more school pickups, no more lunches to pack. I still lived under their roof, but I was no longer part of the daily rhythm of the home. I was a guest in a life I used to help shape. Jennifer was probably 25, with the kind of effortless energy that comes from youth and professional training. She had an early childhood education degree and spoke confidently about behavior modification techniques and educational enrichment activities. "I am excited to implement some structured learning opportunities," she told Sarah, while I stood there feeling ancient and irrelevant. The boys are at such crucial developmental stages. I wanted to mention that I would been providing learning opportunities for months, teaching Marcus to read chapter books, helping Tyler with his letters and numbers, showing them both how to garden and cook and appreciate nature. But my contributions suddenly seemed quaint and insufficient compared to Jennifer's credentials. Sarah walked me through Jennifer's schedule with the clinical efficiency she used with her real estate clients. Jennifer would handle school pickup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She would supervise homework time and provide educational enrichment activities. She would manage bath time and bedtime routines on the nights when Sarah and James had social commitments. "What about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You will still be here, of course," Sarah said quickly. "But this will give you more time to relax, pursue your own interests. You have been working so hard with the boys working." She made caring for my grandsons sound like a burden I would been shouldering rather than a joy I would been treasuring. Within 2 weeks, my role had been systematically reduced. Jennifer handled most of the boys' afternoon activities. Sarah took over bedtime stories, claiming she wanted to reconnect with her sons. Even my cooking came under scrutiny when Sarah mentioned that Jennifer had suggested more organic options and fewer processed ingredients. I found myself with long stretches of empty time, sitting in my small room while life continued around me. I could hear Jennifer's cheerful voice guiding the boys through educational games, see her efficient organization of their toys and books, watch her confident interactions with Sarah about child development theories. The final public humiliation came at Marcus's school Halloween party. I would been planning his costume for weeks, a detailed dinosaur outfit I would sewn by hand, complete with spikes and a tail that moved when he walked. I would volunteer to help with the classroom party, bringing homemade pumpkin cookies shaped like jack-o'-lanterns. But when I arrived at the school, I found Jennifer already there, helping distribute store-bought cupcakes and supervising games with professional competence. Sarah was there too, laughing with other mothers, introducing Jennifer as our wonderful childcare coordinator. No one introduced me as anything. I stood at the edge of the room, holding my cookie tray, watching my grandson show off his costume to Jennifer, while Sarah took photos of the 2 of them together. When Marcus finally noticed me, he ran over with excitement. "Grandma, Look at my dinosaur costume. It is beautiful, sweetheart, I said, kneeling to hug him. You look very fierce. But before we could talk further, Jennifer appeared with a clipboard. Marcus, it is time for the costume parade. Come line up with the other children. And just like that, my grandson was swept away into organized activities while I stood holding cookies no one seemed to want. Sarah approached me near the end of the party, her smile bright but distant. Thanks for coming, Mom. It means so much to have family support. Family support. I would been reduced to a supportive role in my own grandson's life, a background presence while others took center stage. That evening, I sat in my room listening to Sarah put the boys to bed, hearing her read the same stories I would been reading to them for 2 years. I could hear Tyler asking where I was, and Sarah's quick deflection, Grandma's resting. Sweetheart. She gets tired more easily now. Tired, old, outdated, replaced. 3 days after the Halloween party, Sarah came into my room with a tone that was far too cheerful for the words she was about to say. Hey, Mom, can we talk for a sec? I was folding laundry, pairing up Marcus's mismatched socks like I always had. I looked up and smiled, though something in me immediately braced. She sat on the edge of the bed, crossed her legs, and exhaled like this was just another chat. But I would been a mother long enough to recognize the look in her eyes. She was trying to soften the blow before she delivered it. So, she began, James and I have been talking, and we really, really appreciate everything you have done. Truly, there it was, appreciate. That word had started to sound like a warning label, a polite exit strategy masked as gratitude. She continued, we just feel like, maybe it is time for you to think about having your own space again. Somewhere that is really yours, independent, private. My fingers tightened around the laundry. We have loved having you, she added quickly, and the kids adore you, but they are getting older, and we kind of need to reclaim the space, especially with James working from home more. I stared at her. She still hadn't made eye contact. I see, I said, folding another sock slowly. Sarah looked relieved, as if I had agreed without even being asked. We will help with the move, of course, she offered. We were thinking maybe you could stay at that retirement apartment complex on Birch. It is quiet and they have bingo nights. You used to love bingo. I almost laughed. Bingo, as if that could replace bedtime stories with Tyler or pancake mornings with Marcus, as if it could substitute the closeness we would once shared. I nodded again. When would you like me out by? I asked quietly. She blinked, not expecting me to agree so easily. I mean, no rush, maybe by the end of the month? I stood and walked to the window. The backyard was still speckled with confetti from Marcus's birthday party the week before. The one I would planned, decorated, baked for. The one where Sarah had posted so grateful for this village on Instagram, tagging everyone but me. Sure, I said calmly. End of the month is fine. Sarah stood, seeming oddly satisfied. Thanks, Mom, I am glad we are on the same page. As she walked out, she added over her shoulder. This will be good for you. Good for me. I sat back down slowly, my hands resting on my lap. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. She didn't scream, and I didn't cry. But make no mistake, I was being asked to leave. Not out of anger, but out of quiet dismissal. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I no longer fit. I had become inconvenient. The apartment I found was humble by any standard A1 bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown, sandwiched between a pawn shop and a nail salon. The stairs creaked ominously. The heating was unreliable, and my single window overlooked an alley where stray cats fought over garbage. But it was mine. After 2 years of living in Sarah's carefully curated suburban home, there was something deeply satisfying about having a space that belonged entirely to me. However modest it might be, the rent consumed most of my Social Security check, leaving little for extras. But I told myself it was temporary. I would figure out a way to supplement my income, maybe find part-time work, or taken sewing projects. At 71, I still had skills and energy, even if my daughter had convinced herself otherwise. The first week was brutal, not because of the apartment's shortcomings, but because of the silence. After years of waking to children's voices and household bustle, the profound quiet felt oppressive. No little feet running down hallways, no urgent requests for help with shoelaces or breakfast preferences. No sense of being needed for anything more significant than remembering to lock my own door. I tried to establish routines that would give my days structure. Morning coffee by the window, afternoon walks through the neighborhood. Evening reading from library books I hadn't had time to enjoy while caring for Marcus and Tyler. But everything felt hollow, like I was playing at being content rather than actually feeling it. The loneliness was crushing. I would given up my friends and activities when I moved in with Sarah, convinced that my grandchildren were all the companionship I needed. Now, I found myself without a social network, without purpose, without the daily interactions that had made me feel human. I called Sarah twice during that first week, hoping to hear the boys' voices, but both calls went to voicemail. When she finally returned my messages, her tone was polite but distant, like I was an acquaintance checking in, rather than her mother seeking connection. "The boys are adjusting well," she told me. "Jennifer has them on a really good schedule. Maybe we can arrange a visit in a few weeks when things settle down." A visit to see my own grandsons required scheduling and approval, as if I would become a stranger who needed supervised access to my own family. The worst moments came at bedtime, when I would lie in my narrow bed listening to the city sounds, sirens, voices, music from neighboring apartments, and remember the soft breathing from Tyler's monitor, the way Marcus would sometimes call out in his sleep for water or another blanket. I would trained myself to wake at the slightest sound from their rooms, and now my vigilant grandmother instincts had nothing to protect. I started questioning everything about myself. Had I been too involved with the boys? Too controlling? Had my old-fashioned methods really been harmful? Was I clinging to relevance in a world that had moved beyond my understanding? Depression settled over me like fog, making simple tasks feel insurmountable. Some days I barely got dressed, spending hours staring out my window at the alley cats, envying their simple existence. They fought for scraps and found warmth wherever they could, but they didn't expect more from life than survival. 3 weeks into my new living situation, I hit bottom. I would run out of groceries but couldn't summon the energy to shop. I hadn't spoken to another human being in 4 days. I sat on my sagging couch, surrounded by boxes I still hadn't unpacked, and wondered if this was how the rest of my life would unfold, a gradual fade into irrelevance and isolation. That is when I remembered the box of Robert's papers I would hastily packed when moving out of Sarah's house. I would been avoiding it, not ready to face the flood of memories and grief that came with sorting through a deceased spouse's belongings. But in my current state of numbness, even sadness felt preferable to emptiness. I pulled the box from my closet and began sorting through the contents slowly. Bank statements, insurance documents, warranty information for appliances. We would no longer own the mundane paperwork of a shared life that had ended too soon. Near the bottom, wrapped in a rubber band with other miscellaneous papers, I found something that made me pause. A lottery ticket, creased and yellowed, dated 6 months before Robert's death. He would bought tickets occasionally, usually when the jackpot grew large enough to capture public attention. We would joke about what we would do with imaginary winnings, travel to Ireland, renovate the kitchen, spoil our grandchildren outrageously. I would forgotten about this particular ticket completely. After Robert's funeral, I would been too overwhelmed with grief and practical arrangements to think about checking his lottery purchases. Now, holding it in my hands, I felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with desperate hope. Probably worthless, I told myself, but I had nothing else to occupy my time. I found my laptop and navigated to the lottery website, searching for the drawing results from that date, 6 months ago. The winning numbers appeared on my screen: 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and Powerball 18. I looked at Robert's ticket, expecting disappointment, and felt my heart stop, Every number matched perfectly. I checked again, certain I would made an error, but the numbers were unmistakable. Robert had bought a winning ticket worth $2, 8 million, and I would been sitting on it for months, completely unaware. My hands began shaking as the magnitude of this discovery settled over me. This wasn't just money, it was freedom, it was choices. It was the power to shape my own future, instead of accepting whatever scraps others were willing to offer me. For the first time since moving into this depressing apartment, I felt something other than despair. I felt possibility stirring, tentative but real, like the first shoots of green after a long winter. Robert had left me one final gift, and I was going to make sure it counted. The lottery office downtown was nothing like I would expected. Instead of the glamorous setting I would imagined from television coverage, it was a modest suite of offices in a nondescript building, staffed by polite but businesslike employees who handled life, changing moments with the same efficiency they might bring to processing driver's license renewals. After confirming the ticket's authenticity and my identity, I sat across from a financial advisor named Mrs. Chen, who explained my options with patient thoroughness. I could take annual payments over 30 years, or accept a reduced lump sum immediately. Most people your age choose the lump sum, she explained. It provides more flexibility for estate planning and immediate use. Your age, even here, in my moment of triumph. Someone was reminding me of my limitations, my presumed frailty, but instead of feeling diminished, I felt energized by the assumption. Let them think I was just another elderly woman who had gotten lucky. They had no idea what I was planning. I chose the lump sum without hesitation. After taxes, I would have roughly $1, 7 million more money than I would ever imagine possessing, enough to completely rewrite the final chapters of my life. The processing took several days, during which I maintained my routine carefully, not wanting to attract attention or speculation. But inside, I was planning with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. This windfall wasn't just about financial security, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy, my right to live life on my own terms. I spent hours online, researching possibilities that had seemed impossible just days earlier. Travel destinations, continuing education programs, volunteer opportunities, investment strategies. The world suddenly felt vast and welcoming rather than threatening and confusing. But more than anything, I thought about Sarah and the casual cruelty with which she would dismiss me. Not with anger, I was beyond that now, but with a growing sense of justice. She would assumed I was powerless, dependent, grateful for whatever minimal place she chose to give me in her life. She was about to learn how wrong she had been. When the money finally cleared into my account, I sat in my shabby apartment, looking at the bank balance on my laptop screen, feeling like I was viewing someone else's life. Grace Patterson, millionaire. It had a nice ring to it. My first purchase was symbolic rather than practical. A subscription to a travel magazine, something I would always wanted but couldn't justify on my modest income. As I filled out the online form, entering my credit card information without worrying about the cost, I felt the first real joy I would experienced since leaving Sarah's house. The second purchase was more significant. A consultation with an estate planning attorney. If I was going to have money, I was going to make sure it went where I wanted it to go. And right now, that definitely didn't include my daughter. The estate planning attorney, Mr. Rodriguez, had an office that radiated quiet competence. Rich wood paneling, leather, bound legal volumes, family photos that suggested stability and success. He was probably in his 50s, with graying temples and kind eyes that reminded me of Robert. Mrs. Patterson, he said, reviewing the financial documents I would provided. This is quite a windfall. Have you given thought to how you would like to structure your estate plan? I would been thinking about little else for the past week. I want to create a trust for my grandsons, Marcus and Tyler. They are 6 and 4 now. I would like the money to be available to them when they turn 25, but only under certain conditions. Mr. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, interested. What sort of conditions? Completion of a college degree or trade certification, proof of employment or entrepreneurial activity, and evidence of kindness, volunteer work, charitable giving, something that shows they understand the responsibility that comes with privilege. He nodded approvingly. Those are thoughtful requirements. And your daughter? Nothing for my daughter, I said firmly. She has made her priorities clear, and they don't include me. I would like the trust structured, so she has no access or control over the funds. Mr. Rodriguez made careful notes. That is certainly possible. We can create ironclad provisions that prevent any interference with your wishes. Would you like to include a letter of explanation for the beneficiaries? I thought about this carefully. Yes, but not one that speaks poorly of their mother. I want them to understand that this money comes with expectations, that they use it to build meaningful lives, that they remember the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of age or circumstance. Over the next 2 hours, we crafted a comprehensive estate plan that reflected my values rather than my frustrations. The trust would be managed by a reputable firm, overseen by Mr. Rodriguez's office, and structured to encourage my grandsons to become productive, compassionate adults. There is one more thing, I said as we concluded our meeting. I would like to establish a scholarship fund at the local community college, something for older students returning to education, people who might be starting over later in life. Mr. Rodriguez smiled. That is a beautiful legacy, Mrs. Patterson. How much would you like to allocate? $200,000 to start, I said, surprising myself with the ease of committing such a large sum. Call it the Robert Patterson Second Chances Scholarship. He would have loved the idea of helping people reinvent themselves. As I left the law office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The money wasn't just sitting in my account anymore. It was working toward purposes that mattered to me, creating positive change that would outlast my lifetime. But the most satisfying part wasn't the charitable giving, or even the trust for my grandsons. It was the knowledge that Sarah would eventually discover her complete exclusion from my estate, would have to confront the consequences of treating me like disposable help, rather than beloved family. I wasn't seeking revenge. Exactly. I was seeking justice, the quiet, inevitable kind that comes when actions finally meet their appropriate consequences. That evening, I began researching international destinations with renewed focus. Italy, with its gentle climate and rich culture. I wasn't just planning a vacation, I was planning an escape, a complete reinvention of my life in a place where no one knew me as Sarah's discarded mother, or Jennifer's obsolete predecessor. Somewhere, I could be Grace again, not grandma or mom or burden. Just Grace, a woman with choices, resources, and all the time in the world to figure out who she wanted to become in the years ahead. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt excited about the future, instead of merely resigned to enduring it. And the best part was, Sarah would have no idea where I would gone, or how dramatically my circumstances had changed, until it was far too late for her to adjust her calculations. The phone started ringing on a Tuesday morning in early December. I was researching flights to Rome, comparing airlines and visa requirements, when Sarah's number appeared on my screen. I let it go to voicemail. Just as I had for the past month, her message was brief. Almost casual. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you are settling into your new place, okay? Give me a call when you get a chance. No urgency. No acknowledgement of the weeks of silence between us. No recognition that she would essentially exiled me from my grandsons' lives. Just a perfunctory check, probably prompted by guilt or social obligation rather than genuine concern. I deleted the message without responding. The calls became more frequent over the next week. Sarah, then James, then Sarah again. The messages grew longer, more insistent, tinged with a confusion I found deeply satisfying. Mom, I am starting to worry. Could you please call me back? The boys have been asking about you, and I don't know what to tell them. The boys had been asking. How interesting that their questions mattered now, when they might reflect poorly on Sarah's parenting, but hadn't mattered when she was systematically removing me from their daily lives. On Friday, Sarah showed up at my apartment building, pressing my buzzer repeatedly until Mrs. Kowalski from the first floor complained about the noise. I watched from my window as Sarah stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the building with obvious distaste. Her perfect suburban composure clearly shaken by the neighborhood's rough edges. She tried calling my cell phone while standing directly below my window, as if proximity might somehow force me to answer. I could see her frustration building as the call went to voicemail again, could almost hear her calculating how this situation might affect her carefully managed image. After 20 minutes, she gave up and drove away in her pristine SUV, leaving me with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't expected to feel. For the first time in our relationship, I had something she wanted contact with me, and I was choosing not to give it to her. The power dynamic had shifted, and we both knew it. The following Monday brought a new development. Sarah contacted my apartment building's management office, claiming she was concerned about an elderly tenant who might be experiencing a medical emergency. Mrs. Chen, the building manager, knocked on my door with obvious embarrassment. "Mrs. Patterson, I am sorry to bother you, but your daughter called. She seems very worried. She asked if we could do a welfare check." I invited Mrs. Chen in for tea, showing her clearly that I was healthy, competent, and in no need of assistance. "My daughter and I are having a disagreement," I explained. "I am choosing not to speak with her right now, which is my right as an adult." Mrs. Chen nodded, understandingly, of course. "I will let her know you are fine, but that you prefer to handle your own affairs. Some families," she added with a knowing look, "they think age means you lose your right to privacy." That afternoon, Sarah tried a different approach. She sent Marcus's teacher to my apartment, claiming she was checking on a student's grandmother who might be unwell. Miss Rodriguez was kind but clearly uncomfortable with her role as messenger. "Marcus mentions you often," she told me gently. "He has been asking when you will visit his classroom again." The manipulation was obvious, using my love for my grandson to force contact with Sarah. But it still stung. I missed Marcus terribly, missed both boys, with an ache that sometimes left me breathless. But I wasn't going to let sentiment override my hard-won autonomy. "Please tell Marcus that I love him very much," I said. "But any visits would need to be arranged through proper channels, not through concerned teachers." By the third week of December, Sarah's desperation was becoming apparent. She would left 17 voicemails, sent countless texts, and even tried reaching out through my old church, claiming she was worried about my mental health. The breaking point came when she contacted Mr. Rodriguez's law office, demanding information about my recent legal activities. His secretary called to inform me of the contact, clearly amused by Sarah's transparent attempt to gather intelligence. "She seemed very interested in whether you had been updating your will," the secretary reported. "Mr. Rodriguez told her that client confidentiality prevents him from discussing your affairs with anyone, including family members." There it was, the real source of Sarah's sudden concern, not my well-being, not the boys missing their grandmother, but worry about her financial inheritance. She would probably assumed that my modest circumstances meant she would eventually inherit whatever small estate I might leave behind, and my recent silence had triggered anxiety about those expectations. How perfectly that crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. Even her concern for me was ultimately about her own interests. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a travel agent specializing in long-term international stays. The second was to Mr. Rodriguez, instructing him to prepare a final communication for Sarah, not from me, but from his office, professional and legally bulletproof. I was done playing games. Sarah wanted to know where she stood in my life. She was about to find out, with crystal clarity and legal documentation. The letter from Mr. Rodriguez's office reached Sarah on a cold January morning. I knew because she called my number 37 times that day, each call going to voicemail, each message more frantic than the last. The letter was masterfully composed, formal, unambiguous, and utterly devastating in its quiet politeness. It informed Sarah that I had updated my estate plan, that she was not included as a beneficiary, and that my assets would be distributed according to my wishes as documented in legal instruments she had no right to review or contest. It also notified her that any further attempts to contact my legal representatives, medical providers, or residential management would be considered harassment and handled accordingly. But the most beautiful part was the final paragraph, which Mr. Rodriguez had crafted with subtle brilliance. Mrs. Patterson wishes to convey that her decisions reflect careful consideration of family relationships and values. She hopes that all parties will respect her autonomy and right to privacy during this period of personal reflection. Personal reflection. It sounded so dignified, so reasonable. No mention of abandonment, or cruelty, or casual dismissal. Just an elderly woman making thoughtful choices about her future, as was her legal right. Sarah's voicemails that day revealed her complete panic. The polite mask she would worn for months dissolved entirely, replaced by a raw desperation that might have moved me once, but now only confirmed the wisdom of my decisions. "Mom, what is this about? I don't understand what is happening. Please, please call me back. I am scared. I am worried about you. The boys need you. I need you. She needed me." How remarkable that her need had suddenly become urgent. Now that she understood, I might have actual assets to distribute, actual power to wield. Where had that need been when she was replacing me with Jennifer? When she was criticizing my methods? When she was pushing me towards senior living facilities? I listened to each message once, then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. These weren't the words of a daughter who loved me. They were the calculations of someone who would realize she might have miscalculated badly. 3 days later, Sarah appeared at my apartment building again. But this time she wasn't alone. She would brought Marcus and Tyler, positioning them strategically in front of the entrance, where I couldn't miss seeing them from my window. The sight of my grandsons nearly broke my resolve. Tyler was wearing the dinosaur hat I would knitted for him last Christmas, and Marcus carried a handmade card with "We miss you, Grandma," written in his careful 6-year-old script, but I also noticed how Sarah stayed behind them, using their innocence as a shield, leveraging their genuine love for me to force a confrontation she couldn't achieve through her own appeals. She was willing to confuse and potentially hurt her own children to get what she wanted from me. That calculation, more than anything else, confirmed the wisdom of my silence. I watched from my window as Marcus looked up at the building hopefully, clearly told by his mother that I was inside somewhere waiting to sweep him into the hugs he remembered. I saw Tyler shift nervously from foot to foot, sensitive to the adult tensions he couldn't understand. And I saw Sarah checking her phone, scanning the windows, orchestrating this emotional manipulation with the same efficiency she brought to staging houses for potential buyers. After 30 minutes, she gave up and herded the boys back to her car. I could see Marcus's confusion as they drove away, could imagine his questions about why Grandma hadn't come down to see them. That night, I cried for the first time since leaving Sarah's house. Not for myself, but for Marcus and Tyler, innocent casualties in their mother's campaign to control me through guilt and emotional blackmail. But even through my tears, I knew I was making the right choice. I wasn't abandoning my grandsons. I was protecting them from learning that love could be transactional, that people could be discarded when they stopped serving others' purposes. One day, when they were older, they would understand why their grandmother had chosen dignity over manipulation, autonomy over dependency. They would read the letters I would written for them, held in trust until they were mature enough to appreciate the lessons within. Until then, my love for them would have to be expressed through distance rather than presence, through silence rather than words. The next morning, I booked my flight to Italy, one way, departing in 3 weeks, with 2 large suitcases and a heart full of possibility. The plane lifted off on a Tuesday morning in February, carrying me away from everything familiar toward something I couldn't yet imagine. As Chicago disappeared beneath the clouds, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom from other people's expectations. Italy welcomed me with gentle warmth, even in winter. I would rented a small apartment in Siena, a medieval town in Tuscany, choosing it specifically because it was the kind of place Sarah would never think to look for me. Cobblestone streets, ancient walls, markets where vendors spoke passionate Italian and didn't care that I was a 71-year-old woman starting over. The first month was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not financially, my lottery winnings had made me more comfortable than I would ever dreamed. But emotionally, I would spent so many years defining myself through relationships to others that living entirely for myself felt foreign, sometimes frightening. I would wake in my tiny apartment overlooking the Piazza del Campo and have to remind myself that I didn't need to check anyone's schedule, prepare anyone's breakfast, or worry about anyone's needs but my own. The freedom was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Slowly, I began building routines that belonged only to me. Morning coffee at the cafe below my apartment, where the elderly proprietor, Signora Benedetti, gradually warmed to my attempts at Italian conversation. Afternoon walks through vineyards where I could think or not think as I chose. Evening language classes at the community center, where I was neither the oldest nor the most fumbling student. I bought an easel and began painting again, something I would abandon decades earlier when marriage and motherhood consumed my time. My hands remembered the pleasure of mixing colors, of watching empty canvas transform into something beautiful and entirely mine. But the most unexpected joy came from the simplest discovery. I liked myself, without the constant pressure to be useful, accommodating, grateful for whatever scraps of attention others offered. I found that Grace Patterson was actually interesting company. I had opinions about art and literature, preferences about food and music, thoughts about politics and philosophy that I would buried under years of prioritizing others' needs. 3 months into my Italian adventure, I received a call from Mr. Rodriguez. Sarah had hired her own attorney and was attempting to challenge my estate plan, claiming I would make changes while mentally incompetent due to grief and isolation. It is completely without merit, he assured me. We have extensive documentation of your mental acuity, including the psychological evaluation we completed. But I wanted you to be aware of the attempt. I felt a brief flicker of anger, not at the challenge itself, but at Sarah's willingness to publicly question my competence in pursuit of money that had never been hers. But the anger passed quickly, replaced by something much more powerful. Pity. Let her waste her time and money. I told Mr. Rodriguez, the documents will speak for themselves. That evening, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the medieval walls of Siena, sipping Chianti, made by a local vintner who would become a friend, and reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I would been a dismissed grandmother living in my daughter's house, grateful for whatever role she chose to give me. Now I was an expatriate artist learning Italian, exploring Tuscany, building friendships based on shared interests rather than family obligation. I was writing letters to my grandsons that they would receive when they turned 18, filled with stories of their grandmother's adventures, her discovery that life could begin again at any age. Sarah's legal challenge failed, as Mr. Rodriguez had predicted. The psychological evaluation held up. My documented competence was unassailable, and the judge dismissed her petition with a warning about frivolous litigation. I learned about the outcome through a brief email from my attorney and felt only mild satisfaction. Sarah's failure to control my estate plan mattered less than my success in controlling my own narrative, my own future, my own definition of what it meant to age with grace and purpose. 6 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. Not Sarah, she would apparently given up her attempts to locate me, but Jennifer, the young woman who would replace me in my grandsons' lives. She found me painting in the town square, easels set up to capture the late afternoon light on the ancient stone walls. I recognized her immediately, though she seemed smaller somehow, less confident than she would appeared in Sarah's kitchen. "Mrs. Patterson," she said tentatively, "I hope you don't mind me coming. I got your location from, well, it doesn't matter how. I wanted to talk to you." I invited her for coffee, curious about what had motivated a trip across an ocean to find a woman she would help to replace. I quit working for the Hendersons last month, she told me as we sat in Signora Benedetti's cafe. I couldn't the way they talked about you, especially after you left. It wasn't right. She described a household that had grown increasingly tense in my absence. The boys asked constantly about me, becoming withdrawn and difficult when their questions weren't answered. Satisfactorily, Sarah had grown sharp and defensive, clearly regretting her decision to push me out, but unable to admit her mistake. Marcus still sleeps with that dinosaur shirt. You bought him, Jennifer said softly, and Tyler will not let anyone else make his breakfast the way you used to. The image of my grandson struggling with my absence broke my heart. But I also felt a quiet vindication. I hadn't been easily replaceable after all. My love, my attention, my presence in their lives had mattered in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated when she decided I was obsolete. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Jennifer looked down at her coffee cup, because I was part of something wrong. I let myself believe that newer was better, that my education made me more qualified to love those children than you were. But love isn't something you learn in textbooks. It is something you build through time and patience and presence. She paused, then looked up at me with eyes bright with unshed tears. Those boys loved you in a way they will never love me, no matter how many behavioral charts I make or educational activities I plan. And I helped take that away from them. I reached across the table and patted her hand gently. You were doing your job, Jennifer. The failure wasn't yours. We talked for another hour about children and families, about the difference between caring for someone and caring about them. Jennifer was a good person who had been caught up in Sarah's need to modernize and control every aspect of her family's life. As she prepared to leave, she handed me an envelope. Marcus made this for you. He asked me to give it to you if I ever saw you again. Inside was a drawing of 3 figures, a tall woman with silver hair, a smaller boy, and an even smaller boy. Above them, in his careful lettering, Marcus had written, I love you, Grandma. Come home soon, I cried then, not with sadness, but with a complex mix of joy and grief. My grandsons remembered me, loved me, wanted me back in their lives. But home wasn't Sarah's house anymore. Home was this small apartment in an ancient Italian town, where I would learn to value myself as much as I would always valued others. That night, I wrote letters to Marcus and Tyler, not the ones for their 18th birthdays, but immediate ones that Jennifer promised to deliver. I told them about Italy, about learning to paint again, about the kind old woman who made the best pastries in the world. I told them I loved them beyond measure and thought about them every day, but I didn't promise to come home soon, because I would finally learn the difference between loving someone and sacrificing yourself for them. A year after my arrival in Italy, I received a letter that surprised me, not from Sarah, but from Marcus, written in his 7-year-old script with obvious effort and help from someone with better spelling skills. Dear Grandma Grace, it began. I miss you very much. Mom says you moved far away because you needed adventure. I hope you are having good adventures. I am learning to read chapter books now. I would like to read one to you someday. Love, Marcus. Tyler's letter came a week later, dictated to someone else but clearly in his own words. Grandma Grace, I still have the dinosaur hat you made me. I wear it when I miss you. Do you still remember me? Do I still remember him? As if I could forget either of them. As if they weren't the first thought I had each morning, and the last each night. I wrote back immediately, sending packages filled with Italian children's books, postcards from my travels, small treasures from local markets. I told them about the cats who lived in the ancient towers, the festivals where people danced in the streets, the man who taught me to make pottery from local clay. But I also began including gentle lessons in my letters, stories about people who traveled far from home to find themselves, about the importance of treating all people with kindness, regardless of their age, about the difference between being needed and being valued. I was planting seeds for conversations we would have when they were older, when they could understand the choices I would made and why I would made them. Meanwhile, my life in Siena continued to flourish in ways I would never expected. I would join a group of expatriate women who met weekly to explore Tuscan history and culture. I would become a regular at the local art cooperative, contributing paintings to group exhibitions, and even selling a few pieces to tourists who appreciated my amateur but enthusiastic landscapes. Most surprisingly, I would begin a tentative friendship with Dr. Marco Rossi, a widowed retired professor who had moved to Siena from Rome after his wife's death. We would meet at the language classes and discovered a shared love of literature and gentle debate about books we would both read. Marco was nothing like Robert, where my husband had been practical and steady. Marco was intellectual and passionate about ideas, but there was something healing about spending time with someone who saw me as Grace the individual rather than Grace the grandmother or Grace the abandoned mother. We took long walks discussing Italian poetry, shared meals where we practiced our respective second languages, attended cultural events where we could sit companionably without feeling obligated to fill every silence with conversation. I wasn't looking for romance. That phase of my life felt complete with Robert's memory, but I was discovering the pleasure of adult friendship, based on mutual interests and respect. Marco treated me as an equal, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered, whose company was sought rather than tolerated. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring, almost 2 years after I would left Chicago. I recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately, though the careful script looked less confident than usual, as if written and rewritten multiple times. I let it sit unopened on my kitchen table for 3 days, not from fear, but from the need to prepare myself for whatever it might contain. I would build such a beautiful life in Italy, surrounded myself with people who valued me, and activities that brought me joy. I wasn't sure I wanted to invite the old pain back in, even briefly. When I finally opened it, the letter was shorter than I would expected, and completely different in tone from any communication I would ever received from my daughter. "Dear Mom," it began. "I know I have no right to expect you to read this, let alone respond. I know I have hurt you in ways I am only beginning to understand, but I need to try to explain, not to justify what I did, but to acknowledge what I lost. When I lost you," the letter continued in this vein for 2 handwritten pages. No excuses about stress or modern parenting philosophies, no attempts to minimize the impact of her choices. Just a raw acknowledgement of failure and grief. "The boys ask about you constantly," she wrote. "Tyler still cries sometimes at bedtime, wanting you to sing the songs you used to sing. Marcus has become withdrawn and angry in ways that scare me. I tell them you are having adventures, but they want to know when you are coming home. And I don't know what to say, because I don't even know if you consider this home anymore. I hired Jennifer because I thought professional training was more important than love. I pushed you towards senior living because I thought independence meant not needing family support. I criticized your methods because I thought newer was automatically better. I was wrong about everything that mattered. The most surprising part came near the end. I found out about the lottery ticket, about the estate changes, about your move to Italy, not from lawyers or investigators, but from Jennifer, who told me she would visited you. I am not writing because I am angry about the money. I am writing because I finally understand that I threw away something precious for the sake of appearances and control. I don't know how to fix what I broke, or if it can be fixed. But I want you to know that I see it now, what I did to you, what I cost our family, what I destroyed with my arrogance and ingratitude. I am sorry, Mom. I am so deeply, completely sorry." The letter was signed simply Sarah, not Love. Sarah or your daughter, just her name, as if she no longer presumed to claim more than basic recognition. I read it 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agendas, but found only genuine remorse and the kind of self-awareness that comes from real consequences. This wasn't the calculating woman who would use my grandsons as emotional leverage or hired lawyers to challenge my competence. This was someone who would finally understood what she would lost. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I carried the letter with me on my daily walks, thinking about forgiveness and boundaries, about the difference between accepting an apology and returning to old patterns. After a week of consideration, I wrote back. Not a long letter, but a careful one. Sarah, I received your letter and appreciate your honesty. Acknowledging harm is the first step toward healing. Though it is only the first step, I have built a good life here in Italy, surrounded by people who value me and activities that bring me joy. I am not the same woman who left your house 2 years ago, and I will not return to being her. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it will have to be on different terms entirely, terms that recognize my autonomy, my right to make my own choices about where and how I live, my value as a person rather than just my usefulness as help. I miss Marcus and Tyler every day, but I will not sacrifice my dignity for access to them. If you are serious about change, prove it through your actions over time, not just your words in a moment of regret. I am willing to consider carefully structured contact video calls with the boys, perhaps, or brief visits if you are ever in Italy. But I will not be returning to Chicago, and I will not be available for the kind of relationship we had before. You hurt me deeply, Sarah. But more than that, you showed me who I was becoming in your house: smaller, quieter, less sure of my own worth with each passing day. I will not go back to being that version of myself, not for you or anyone else. I signed it Grace Patterson rather than Mom, making clear that while I was open to rebuilding, it would have to be as equals rather than as someone seeking approval from someone granting or withholding it. Sarah's response came within a week, shorter, but just as thoughtful as her first letter. She accepted my terms without argument, asked permission to arrange video calls with the boys, and promised to respect my boundaries while working to earn back my trust. The first video call was awkward but beautiful. Marcus and Tyler had grown so much, their faces more mature but their eyes still bright with love when they saw me on the screen. They told me about school and friends and the new books they were reading, asked about my paintings and the Italian words I was learning. Sarah stayed in the background during most of the call, letting me connect with my grandsons without interference. When she did speak, it was to facilitate rather than control, to encourage the boys' questions rather than redirect the conversation. It was a small step, but it felt significant. For the first time in years, Sarah was prioritizing my relationship with my grandsons over her own need to manage and control every interaction. We have been having these calls monthly for 6 months now. Sarah sends me photos and school artwork, updates about the boys' activities and achievements. She has never asked when I am coming back, never pressured me to change my living situation, never suggested that my current life is temporary or insufficient. I don't know if we will ever have the close relationship we once had, or if I even want that. Too much has changed, and I have learned too much about my own strength to go back to the old dynamics. But I am discovering that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and reconciliation doesn't require returning to old patterns. It is possible to love someone while maintaining boundaries, to rebuild trust without sacrificing autonomy. Marcus is 8 now, Tyler is 6. In 10 years, they will be old enough to read the letters I have written for them, to understand the choices I made and why I made them. They will learn that their grandmother didn't abandon them, but refused to accept abandonment herself. And maybe, by then, they will understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is show the people you care about that dignity and self-respect are not optional, even in the name of family harmony. Today I sit on my balcony in Siena, watching the sun set behind medieval walls that have stood for centuries, and I feel something I never expected to feel again: complete peace with my choices. The lottery ticket Robert left me wasn't just a financial windfall. It was permission to value myself as much as I would always valued others. Sarah may call. The boys may grow up wondering why their grandmother lives so far away. But I will never again mistake being needed for being loved, or confuse usefulness with worth. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is showing them what it looks like to choose dignity over convenience, respect over familiarity, autonomy over acceptance. And sometimes, the woman who seems the most powerless turns out to be the one who was simply waiting for the right moment to reclaim her power. I hope you enjoyed this story from her light. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family peace and personal dignity? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about women who find strength in unexpected places and courage in difficult choices. Sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest transformations.